If the Chicago Bears decide to run it back with Matt Eberflus and Justin Fields in 2024, they should be able to build off a lot of the success they're having late in this season. But not everything that's going well right now will be sustainable in the long term.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on social media, any and all your favorite platforms at Locked On Bears, including YouTube, where you can view all of our video podcasts as well. Make sure you're checking those out and subscribing wherever you tune in to Locked On Bears. Thanks for making us your first listen today and hopefully every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. On the show today, we look at what the Bears are doing well right now in this sort of late season turnaround, and look at what parts of that are sustainable if the Bears run things back with the same head coach and quarterback in 2024, and maybe what parts of that are not as sustainable based on what we know about this team, these players, and generally like how the NFL works in things that are a little bit more luck-based and things that are a little bit more skill-based that can kind of last from year to year and player to player and position to position. But then we also need to make sure we acknowledge the things that maybe aren't going as well right now that also aren't likely to last, aren't going to keep struggling in the same way and could improve in the future as part of this question of like, what would the future be like if you ran things back as things stand right now? Let's start with the things that are going well right now that should be sustainable. It doesn't mean they're guaranteed to be sustainable, but over the course of, I guess, NFL history, if you really, or at least in the modern age of we have data and analytics to kind of measure, okay, from year to year, how much do things kind of change when you have the same coaching staff and the same general team? How much do things tend to fluctuate in certain areas and what areas tend to be a little bit more stable from year to year? And when you look at what the Bears are doing well right now, certainly all season long, and we saw it all last season, the Bears are a really effective running team. We've seen even within the Matt Eberflus era, that has generally been sustainable. And that's something that and again, I'm not a data scientist here, but it's my understanding that in the analytics, that's something that also bores out pretty well. That the way that the Bears have been successful running the ball offensively is sustainable. This is not a running game that has been overly reliant on explosive running plays, for example, right? It's not like, okay, every couple of games they have that lucky breakaway run where Khalil Herbert goes for 60 yards down the sideline. It's been more consistently the 4, 5, 6 yard chunks than it has been a bunch of short runs and then one big 30-yard run to kind of build the whole average up. The Bears are middle of the league, I think, in explosive run plays this season, and they haven't been overly reliant on that for their rushing production. They've also been fairly consistent in their missed tackles forced for the running backs, and that tends to be something that stays pretty similar from year to year. Running backs who are good at making guys miss in the ways that they make guys miss tend to keep that up at a similar pace from year to year, and guys that don't as much. And run blocking tends to be a little bit more stable from year to year. And plus, we've seen through the course of Justin Fields' career that no matter what the offense is doing well or poorly, the one thing that he's always able to do when healthy is scramble and make big plays with his legs. And yes, those are some of the explosive plays that the Bears have, but like for Justin Fields, so long as he's healthy, those things are sustainable when he's on the field. So those are things like if they run it back with him, you can expect the Bears to continually be able to run the ball effectively and get Justin Fields scrambles. Obviously, if there's a new offensive coordinator, maybe the running scheme changes and maybe some of that can be a little bit less stable. But as it stands right now, I think that is something you can kind of trust to be stable. I think similarly when it comes to the Bears' run defense, right? I guess this is all assuming same coaching staff. Generally, you look at this Bears front seven, I'm not expecting a ton of turnover in that group. Your linebackers are obviously locked in with longer-term contracts, except for Jack Sanborn, I guess, but he's still around. Your defensive line, Billings is locked in, Sweat's locked in, DeMarcus Walker has a couple of years left. You got 2 rookies on the interior there as well. Like, Justin Jones is a free agent, but there'll be some turnover on the defensive line. We'll get to that, but like, generally that front seven is going to be about the same, and if the scheme's about the same, and the players are about the same, and the players have been fairly consistent in terms of, attacking downhill and being able to stop the run even against good running teams, like, that's something to me that doesn't just feel like, all of a sudden the Bears figured something out in run defense and that's not going to last. Like, no, this seems like a pretty solid staple of what the players that are going to be here next year do well, right? It's just a part of their skill set, and that's what feels sustainable to me. Even in the pass rush department, I think some of, but not all of, what the Bears have been able to do defensively rushing the passer can, and dare I say should, be sustainable on an individual level. And that's kind of the key here. I don't think across the board, everyone is going to keep, and the defense as a whole is going to keep rushing the passer completely as well. I think the Bears have been effective blitzing most of the time when they go to the blitzing, and I think that can be a little bit less sustainable when you're not a blitz all the time kind of defense. Teams can pick that up sometimes, and it can kind of be a double-edged sword. But like individual players, Montez Sweat, the rate with which he generates pressure and gets after the quarterback has been fairly significant, fairly stable and sustainable over the course of his career. You don't see big fluctuations where all of a sudden he gets way better one year and then has a down year and way better. It's fairly across the board. You know what you're going to get week in, week out, year in, year out from Montez Sweat. And even, dare I say, a rookie like Gervon Dexter Sr., right? You think of rookies as very variable, perhaps volatile players that are going to develop and have ups and downs. And he certainly will have ups and downs. But you look over the course of this season, his pass rush win rate in what PFF defines as true pass rush or true passing situations, like on plays where he's not stunting, on plays where he's not being double teamed, like just one-on-one regular pass rushes for Gervon Dexter. He's a top 20 interior defensive lineman this season in pass rush win rate in his true one-on-one pass rushing reps. Like, that is a stat that tends to be very stable for players from year to year. Like what Gervon Dexter is doing so far, certainly there will be ups and downs, right? He's not going to be the same guy through and through and should keep getting better in some ways. But the success he's had has not been fluky. That's the point. I think individual guys can keep pass rushing well. Now, whether that equates to the entire pass rush being good will depend on who else they add, whether they bring back Justin Jones to replace him, what else they add at the defensive end spot opposite Montez Sweat. Like, I don't know if the whole pass rush as a whole is sustainable, but some of the individual performances within the pass rushing feels like the kind of thing that statistically looks like it should be stable from season to season. So there's a lot to like about both sides of the ball. They're like, yeah, they can keep doing a lot of this stuff if they run it back next year. There are other things that are going really well for them right now that I'm not sure are as sustainable when we think about what can they really keep up and keep doing and what maybe is more likely to come back down to earth. This idea of regressing to the mean, right? Getting back closer to average. You're doing something really, really well, but it's a little bit uncharacteristically really, really well, or something that just is really hard to do for a long, extended period of time at a really high level, and you're bound to have dips and fluctuations in some key areas that have contributed to the Bears' success this season. So we'll look at what would be a little bit less sustainable that we could expect to fluctuate a bit more and maybe not hold up at this same level if the Bears run it back next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Of course, they've got theater shows, comedy shows, concerts, you name it. They also have Bears games. I use the Gametime app to go to the Bears-Cardinals game on Christmas Eve. It was part of my Christmas present for my mom. We sat in the second row. We had great seats, and I bought my tickets on the Gametime app. I used our promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and I saved $20 on my purchase. I'm not making this up. Like, I literally used the app right here on my phone. I got great seats at a great price, and I could see my view from my seat before I bought my tickets, so I know exactly what I was doing. Falcons at Bears this week. You can get tickets for under $100 into Soldier Field. That includes taxes and fees and all that stuff. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So, while a lot of what the Bears are doing right now at this stage of the late season turnaround should be sustainable. Like some of the turnaround from Matt Eberflus' defense and all that stuff and some of the things the offense has done well should continue. I also think we don't always appreciate when things are going well, what parts of those things are a little bit luck and a little bit fluke and a little less sustainable from season to season. Like, for example, one of the big ones that the Bears have absolutely benefited from this year that I wouldn't expect to go nearly this well every single season is injuries. And certainly not the course of the whole season, but when you talk about this late season turnaround, since Justin Fields returned from the thumb injury, week 12 against the Detroit Lions, and as we know, like this late season turnaround, the Bears have won 4 out of their last 6 games here, including a 2-game winning streak. Like over this turnaround, the Bears have been remarkably healthy, and injuries generally are most attributable to luck. There are certainly aspects and credit deserved to the Bears training staff, to the nutrition side of things, the sports medicine or the sports science kind of stuff. Like all of those guys are definitely playing a factor in the Bears being the healthiest team in the NFL. I think there's not one metric to measure that, but by my estimation, when I look at every team, the Bears are the healthiest team in the NFL right now, and really have been for the last month-ish across the board. Currently, the Chicago Bears have 1 player on injured reserve. That's Yannick Ngakoue out for the season. Yeah, that sucks. It's a big loss for this defense. That is the fewest players of any team on injured reserve. The Bears are the only team in the NFL that have only 1 player on injured reserve. I think the next closest team was 3 or 4 players. I didn't get an exact count, but I kind of glanced quickly across the board. The Packers only have a couple of players on injured reserve. The Rams only have a couple of players on injured reserve. And the Buccaneers only have a couple of players on injured reserve. Everybody else, 10 plus. I mean, some teams are set, like most teams are 8, 9, 10 plus across the board. Guys on injured reserve. And obviously, not all players on injured reserve are created equal. And injured reserve is not the perfect measurement of, guys being banged up or guys being on the injury report. Like there's not one stat that says here's the healthiest team, the least healthiest team per se. But the Bears over this last 6-game stretch have been remarkably healthy. Most of their key important starters across the board have been in there. Obviously, this team dealt with injuries a lot early in the season, and key injuries at key positions: quarterback, running back, left tackle, defensive line, secondary. They had a whole backup secondary for a couple of games there. And that obviously hurt them in a lot of those games. It's a big part of why they started 1-5. But we can also acknowledge that while injuries hurt them a lot early on, it's helping them a ton right now compared to a lot of the teams they're facing. The Browns, super banged up a couple weeks ago, and they still lost that game. The Cardinals, dealing with a lot of injuries. The Lions have had their fair share. The Vikings, obviously without Kirk Cousins, and for some of the season without Justin Jefferson as well. Like the Bears have benefited from being healthy, and we don't always take that into account, that most seasons you're going to have more guys out than this. And so if the Bears were more injured right now, do you think they would win all 4 of these games? You think they beat the Vikings 12-10 if they were a little more injured? Maybe they still beat the Lions because they took it to the Lions pretty well. Maybe they still beat the Cardinals because the Cardinals aren't great. But you just have to kind of wonder how we would feel about this team right now in terms of the win-loss result if they were more injured. If you're, say, take out a couple key starters anywhere on this team, because that's what most other teams are dealing with. And most years, by week 16, it's normal to expect that you're going to be missing a couple of key starters. The Bears have not. And that's helped them play a lot better than other teams that have been a lot more injured. And again, year to year, a lot of injury stuff is just luck. It's you try and take care of their bodies, and you try and be healthy and do all the things in terms of practice and hits and trying to limit the damage guys are going to face. But sometimes you step funny and you get hurt. And it's borne out with data over years that a team's injuries kind of fluctuate a lot from year to year. And there's only so much you can do to prevent injuries. And in football, injuries happen and there's not really much you can do about it. So it would be reasonable to expect that the Bears are the healthiest team in the NFL right now. Next year, probably not going to be as healthy. and they certainly weren't as healthy last year. It fluctuates, and it's only going to stay this good for only so long. So more injuries are likely to happen. The Bears also lead the NFL in interceptions, if I remember correctly, or are certainly up there. I haven't checked that stat in a few weeks. I can pull it up here as I'm talking. But obviously, the Bears have had a lot of turnovers this season. It's been fun and exciting. That's another situation where, and the Bears are now behind the 49ers in interceptions. I pulled out here. They're one behind the 49ers in interceptions this season. I don't have forced fumble stats easily available in front of me. But regardless, turnovers are a little bit like injuries in that there are things you can do as a defense to try and generate more turnovers, and you can be better at it than other teams. But there is a certain aspect of luck from year to year. When you look at defensive turnover stats from season to season, it's very rare that you see the same team have high interceptions for 3, 4, 5 seasons in a row. Sometimes you can sustain it for back-to-back years. Sometimes, you can get on a good stretch for a little while, but even when it's the same defensive coordinator and the same defensive pieces on some of the best defenses we've seen, the Seattle Seahawks of recent years, some of those 49ers defenses under Vic Fangio and stuff, like even those really good defenses of the last 10 years. And the Bears in 2018 are another example of this. Like you can have a year with a bunch of good turnovers, and next year you usually kind of come back down to earth. You end up not going all the way back down to the opposite end of the spectrum, but you rarely see from year to year the same team stay in the top 3 of turnovers. You might stay top 10 from year to year, but not top 3. So you could expect more likely than not the number of turnovers the Bears generate next season will not remain at this same high level that they're currently generating turnovers. It will still remain high, but not number 1, number 2, right? That's the kind of the difference here. Like a good defense can sustain above average turnover generation. No defense has been able to sustain elite turnover generation from year to year to year. That's kind of the difference here. You can keep it good, but you can't keep it great. No defense has been able to do that, and the Bears are currently doing great. And so, statistically speaking, they are the probability is that they will return down to fewer turnovers next season than what we're seeing over this recent stretch of games where the Bears are turning over the ball a lot. And I think some of that has to do with just the variability in coverage, that generally players fluctuate in coverage a little bit from year to year, especially when you've got a bunch of young players in the secondary like the Bears do, with Jaquan Brisker in his second year, Kyler Gordon in his second year, Tyreek Stevenson as a rookie, Terrell Smith as a rookie. Like, I think Jalen Johnson in coverage, very sustainable from year to year. We know he's good. Like, we know what he does well. He's kind of been the same guy. It's just a matter of staying healthy. Eddie Jackson's kind of fluctuate a little bit, and we don't know at this point if Eddie Jackson's going to be back next season or not based on his age and his contract. That's a separate conversation. But I think I don't know that the lockdown coverage the Bears are getting across the board here, or the general high level of coverage that we're seeing on the back end. I don't know how sustainable that is. I'm not going to say it's not sustainable. I'm not going to say there's no way that they keep covering this well. But I just think with some of these younger players, that tends to fluctuate a lot more, even compared to like Gervon Dexter in a pass rushing, where those stats are a little bit more stable. Coverage stuff for young players in the secondary tends to fluctuate a little bit more early in their careers. So outside of Jalen Johnson, I do wonder where the sustainability is there, and it's not something that we can fully count on being exactly the same from game to game and year to year. There's going to be some ups and downs that just generally come with a natural amount of volatility with young players on the back end of the secondary. So sure, some things that are going well right now might not keep going so well in the future, just based on odds and probability that's borne out over decades of football data. But that being said, there are also things that are going on right now that maybe aren't ideal, that should get better, because you're not likely to stay bad at things that you're bad at the whole time, that you'll get better at some of those things too. So even as some of your good things come back to normal, some of your bad things might come back to normal as well. So we'll look at what might not be, like what won't stay bad, won't be sustainable in a negative way, and as a result be a bit more positive next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to do daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control. With PrizePicks, you pick 2 to 6 players and whether they will perform better or worse than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win up to 25 times your money just for getting your picks right. So, for example, DJ Moore's projection is 66.5 receiving yards. You pick him and a couple other players and whether they will perform more or less than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win big. Instead of like other daily fantasy where you're trying to set a lineup and then your lineup has to beat out 1,000 other people's lineups. No, this is just you versus the PrizePicks projection. So you can put your football knowledge to the test and make yourself some really solid money. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. It's an extra $100 to play with at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So while some of the good things might not last, the good times don't always last, the bad times don't always last either. And I think there's some certain aspects, bad's such a strong word here, but just, there are other things that could get better. Just as things that are good might not sustain, maybe other things can get better because the trouble might not sustain there. Like, for example, with the young secondary, like there's times when Tyreek Stevenson gets burned. He gave up a touchdown. He's given up a few touchdowns this season, and it just happens with rookie cornerbacks. And you'd like to think that over time that he would reduce some of the mistakes there, but maybe he won't make all of the same, high level instinctual plays because teams will have more tape on Tyreek Stevenson. Like that's how it works with young players, right? He'll correct some of his mistakes, but teams will learn better how to attack him because they'll have more tape on what he does well and what he doesn't. So that's where you can cut out some of the downsides there. Like a lot of that's going to be player development that can be a little bit of a wild card. I think the same thing is true with the Bears' offensive line right now, right? With Braxton Jones still being young, Darnell Wright still being young. We're not sure what the future at the center position is going to look like. Tevin Jenkins is injured now, and we don't know what he'll be back, right? But is he going to stay at left guard? Is Nate Davis going to stay at right guard? Is Tevin Jenkins going to be the long-term guy at left guard? How they might situate this offensive line in the future may have some fluctuation there. So I think there's a little bit of a wild card there in terms of what this offensive line is going to look like and how the young players on this offensive line might develop in there. I also think like the way the Bears passing game is right now with Justin Fields, it doesn't seem to me like there's any future where the passing game goes backwards from here, right? Like, I think we can all agree this is not a stellar passing game right now, but it's not bad. It's not terrible. They're not unable to move the ball through the air, certainly not. But there's room for improvement in the passing game. And it feels to me like there's almost only room for improvement. Like if you're bringing back Justin Fields and Matt Eberflus, almost regardless of whether it's Luke Getsy or not, which we kind of are all assuming that no matter what, Luke Getsy is going to be fired, but I guess that's not a guarantee, but it feels like it should be, that this passing game can't, it feels like a criticism to say the passing game can't get worse, but it's more like it won't get worse. Like it's hard to envision outside of injuries, I guess, like if Justin Fields is hurt or DJ Moore gets hurt, injuries can make things worse, but separate from that, with the players that you got, running it back with the guys you have, assuming they're healthy, the passing game is not going to get worse. It's either going to stay the same or it's going to get better, but it's not going to get worse from here. And so that's an area where, whether that's a big leap from Justin Fields or not, the passing game is kind of arrow up only from here. It's hard to envision a scenario, again, a healthy scenario, where the passing game goes backwards. So that's an area that, again, I'm not trying to say it will stay bad. It won't stay bad. It's just, it's one of these things where, as far as sustainability goes, that can swing up in the positive direction there. I also think there's some unknown about the rest of the Bears' defensive line and the pass rush, right? We talked about it, like the things on pass rush right now that are sustainable, some of the individual guys and their individual pass rush win rates. But the pass rush as a whole, some potential volatility there on who's going to be there. And, guys like Andrew Billings and guys like DeMarcus Walker, we've seen Walker especially have a lot of volatility from year to year in his pass rush production. Last year, he had 7 sacks and was really solid for the Titans. This year, not a ton of pass rush production. So does that signal that next year he can get a lot better than he's again, it feels like he's not going to get worse next year than he is this year. So it's either stay the same or go up for DeMarcus Walker on the defensive line. And I think same thing in general for whatever starter is opposite Montez Sweat. Yannick Ngakoue was a pretty big disappointment. I don't want to insult to injury here, but he didn't do a ton in terms of based on expectations this season. So a potential replacement probably isn't going to be worse. It's just a matter of either are they about the same or better. There's areas of this team that you just don't feel like it's going to get, it's not really much of a path to getting worse because the Bears are going to have cap space and draft picks and potentially trades with the trade down and stuff to improve other spots that are going to get better. And a lot of the guys that are under contract right now, like there's not a lot of turnover I would expect in this Bears team in terms of guys who are free agents and whatnot. Like, right now your linebackers are locked in. Most of your defensive line is locked in. Your secondary is all young, but Jalen Johnson, it's Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson for sure are question marks, I would say. And then offensively, it's wide receivers not named DJ Moore and maybe cleaning up the offensive line, but like your backfield's probably going to stay pretty similar. Your starting tight end will be the same. Like your quarterback's the same. Like there's not a lot of spots where we would expect the Bears to really overhaul a position. So it feels like a lot of guys are going to kind of be back. Like you're going to generally run it back with a lot of the same players. It's really the question of, are you running it back with the same coaches and the same quarterback? And then and then Jalen Johnson and Eddie Jackson's kind of the other big question. And then how you fill holes at receiver and offensive line, maybe pass rusher. Like that's a oversimplification of what the offseason is like ahead for the Bears. But that's a lot of starters returning next season. And so in theory, you should get a lot of the same play from a lot of the same starters if they're all in the same system and, they're all staying healthy. And some aspects of their game are going to fluctuate. And some, like I said, some statistics are more volatile and less sustainable. And some areas of games tend to be more sustainable. And that's kind of what we've been generally more broadly talking about on a bigger picture standpoint. But like, it's not going to be nearly as much turnover as the year before. So that's what we could imagine running it back might look like. And so I don't know. I'm not left feeling like that means big leap forward if you run it back. I think it means, I don't know. It depends on who the offensive coordinator is, and I still have questions about Matt Eberflus's coaching decisions. It seems like I don't have as many questions about his defensive coaching specifically, but like the conservative philosophy and when they're punting and when they're not going for it on fourth downs and when they're settling for field goals and stuff where the head coach has influence even on the offense in that regard. It'll depend on who his offensive coordinator is, but clearly didn't make the right choice at defensive coordinator and already lost a running backs coach. And now if we're firing the offensive coordinator, it's another like miss on the Matt Eberflus coaching decision. So like, do we trust him to pick the offensive coordinator? Like there's still going to be coaching questions if they run it back with everybody. And there's still going to be development questions about how much better does Fields get? How much better does his offensive line get? Who can they get at receiver? Like, to me, it's not an obvious, like, oh, everything is going to be much better next season. It's like, it should be, I don't know, about as good and maybe a little bit better. But again, injuries and a lack of turnovers can start to skew that a little bit too. And that's why it's not so obvious an answer like for sure run it back with everybody or for sure don't. I still think generally, and we've been pretty consistent on this podcast, you're firing the coaching staff at a minimum. And then the quarterback question is decided by the next head coach with your GM. But largely, you're not going to make the quarterback decision for your next coach. You'll let the next coaching staff decide whether they really love Fields and want to make it work with him or whether they really love one or two of these quarterbacks in the draft and really want to get one of them and move on from Justin Fields. Like that's ultimately where I think things stand right now. But it's been fun to see what's gone better over these final handful of games of the season and maybe what hasn't. And I think it helps set the stage for us a little bit looking forward of like, well, what would it be like if the Bears ran things back? What would be the same and what might be different? As we talked about, some things more sustainable than others. I'd love to hear what you think is and isn't sustainable from this current Bears success that we're seeing. Leave us a comment on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears. You can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. We're on Instagram at Locked On Bears as well. However you do it, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, you can check out some of our national Locked On Sports Today YouTube channel. We've got a 24/7 live feed of Locked On podcasts rolling over there. Coming back tomorrow for Crossover Thursday with Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons to get you everything you need to know about this upcoming Bears opponent because there's only 2 games left. So we got to dial in, really get to know these opponents and enjoy them while we can because we're going to miss this football season when it's over. There's plenty to talk about this offseason, but we'll miss having the games on Sunday, even when maybe the playoffs aren't exactly part of the stakes here. So coming back tomorrow for your second listen. Keep making us your first listen each and every day. And in exchange, I'll be sure to give you an opportunity to bear down.